Welcome to the Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast. I'm your host, Gwendolyn Mitchell, founder and CEO of Moyo Institute and lifelong spiritual seeker and energy worker. Here for thoughtful conversations about health, healing, and happiness by, for, and about Black and African American women. Disclaimer, the Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast does not provide medical advice. The opinions, experiences, and insights shared are for informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast is intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. Don't disregard or delay seeking it because of what you've heard on this podcast. Thank you. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Welcome. I'm Gwen Mitchell, host of Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast, and I'm delighted to have with us today Tracee Stanley for a conversation about Yoga Nidra. Tracee Stanley is the author of the best-selling book, Radiant Rest, Yoga Nidra for Deep Relaxation and Awakened Clarity, and the Luminous Self, Sacred Yogic Practices and Rituals to Remember Who You Are. Tracee is the founder of Empowered Life Circle, a sacred community and portal of practices, rituals, and tantric teachings, inspired by more than 28 years of studentship of Sri Vidya Tantra and the teachings of Himalayan masters. As a post-lineage teacher, Tracee is devoted to sharing the wisdom of Yoga Nidra, rest, meditation, self-inquiry, nature as a teacher, and ancestor reverence. Tracee holds certificates from Pacifica Graduate Institute in Advanced Ecotherapy, New Thinking, Best Practices, and Emerging Modalities, and a Certificate of Advanced Ecopsychology. Tracee is a gift herself, and she's gifted in illuminating the magic and power found in liminal space and weaving devotion and practice into daily life. Welcome, Tracee Stanley.
Thank you so much, Gwen. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, it's lovely. I listened to your audiobook, The Luminous Self, and I just really found it so inspiring and so helpful that I wanted to have an opportunity to have our listeners hear what you have to share. So I'm really delighted to have you as a part of our guest today.
Thank you so much.
So can you tell me, Tracee, what drew you initially to Yoga Nidra, and how did you discover its transformative power in your own life?
That's a great question. What I would say is that I wasn't drawn to Yoga Nidra, that I found Yoga Nidra because I maybe was listening to something that I didn't even know was calling me. I was in the search for deeper teachings of yoga beyond the physical postures and more into the philosophy of yoga. And I was introduced to a teacher, and that teacher was having a satsang, which is kind of like a wisdom talk where maybe there's a practice that's offered at the end. And at the end of this wisdom talk, the teacher asked us to lay down. And I thought, well, this is very strange. Why are we laying down? We haven't moved. We haven't done any postures. I was so used to the shavasana or the corpse pose at the end of a yoga practice. And I laid down and was systematically guided through a deep relaxation technique that I didn't know at the time was called Yoga Nidra. And I found myself being guided through the whole body and getting to about the left ankle. And then all of a sudden, the teacher was saying, come back. And I was like, wait a second, what do you mean come back? Where was I? Where did I go? And what I also felt during that time was that I had gone someplace really peaceful. I had gone to a place that was really deep, and that place was not something that was outside of me. It was a peace and a stillness that existed inside of me. And so that was the beginning of the journey with the practice of Yoga Nidra. And from there on out, I wanted to know as much as I could about Yoga Nidra. I wanted to practice it as often as I could. And it was probably years later that I realized, after offering it in my own yoga classes, that people would say, "Hey, are you going to do that thing again? Are you going to teach that thing where we go through the body and we lay down?" And I started to notice that people needed this type of deep rest and relaxation and permission to actually do nothing.
Beautiful, beautiful. You say Yoga Nidra, Nidra. So thank you for that pronunciation.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I've heard of it for, I guess, maybe over the last couple of years. And I wondered, for instance, if it was specific systematic sequence of guidance, or if it's something that each individual teacher develops. What about that?
Yeah. So there's a number of different traditions and different lineages that offer the practice of Yoga Nidra. And we can think about Yoga Nidra in general terms, because in the West, we are generally talking about Yoga Nidra as a technique of deep relaxation. But we can also think about the fact that this practice is a practice of what is known as Laya Yoga. And Laya Yoga is the yoga of dissolution. So Yoga Nidra is the practice really of subtraction. It's like, how can I continue to subtract to the point where I move to a place where even the thoughts are subtracted? And then I rest in what remains. I rest in presence. And so, yes, there are many sequential scripts or steps that people will talk about. They will talk about moving through the koshas, the energy bodies. They might talk about moving through the states of consciousness or moving through the brainwave states. And all of those are valid ways, especially for us to understand what might be happening while we're in the practice of Yoga Nidra. But my experience is that Yoga Nidra is not a linear practice. It is a state of consciousness, Yoga Nidra is, that is beyond the waking, the dreaming, and the deep sleep. But it is not something that we can make happen. It's something that appears and reveals itself by grace. And then we start to think about Yoga Nidra as a state of consciousness again, as the goddess that is talked about in the Devi Mahatmya. And so the way that I think about it is that we just continue to practice these sequential steps. And this, what I would also say, is the preparation for receiving that grace until we can just let it all go.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, I understand that completely. I tell people, for instance, for when we're actually meeting to do meditation, that we're really not meditating. We're just actually training the brain, training the mind to focus and to be able to move into a state where meditation happens. Meditation is a gift. It's a happening that happens to us. We don't do it, you know?
That's right.
So it's similar in that way. And thank you, because I was thinking about the fourth state beyond waking, sleeping, dreaming. And so the Yoga Nidra is like a portal to the fourth state. I think it's might be how I would, am I understanding it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that Yoga Nidra is described as a place of Turiya, which is the fourth state that you're referring to. Mm-hmm. And that it's also referred to as a samadhi. And it's sometimes referred to as a nirvikalpa samadhi, which is this place of no thought. But I think that we want so desperately to define what exactly it is. And it's something that can't be defined. It's almost as though you're not even maybe aware of it when it's happening, but you know that you've been someplace deep after. You know that there's a fragrance that has traveled back with you that is a reminder to keep going back and keep going back and keep going back. And that's what I think keeps drawing us back to the practice.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I just want to say that the other reason I was really drawn to talk to you is because I could really feel your presence and feel the presence of the divine expressed through you, and very much feel that right now. So again, thank you.
Thank
So,
you. I do want to say something about that, right? I do want to say that that feeling of divine expressed through a being that's in a body is not unique, right? What it requires is for us to be able to slow down,
mhm,
to be able to listen, to be able to feel all of the things that the overculture wants us to kind of move away from by keeping us distracted.
mhm.
Yeah. So thank you
Yeah,
for that.
beautiful, beautiful. So, can you share the story behind writing Radiant Rest and what you felt was missing in the conversation around rest and restoration? But before you do that, let me just say that my interest in this is really deep. From an astrological standpoint, my sun, moon, and Mars are all in Aries and all in the house of work. And so, like, really giving myself permission to find rest has been a difficult challenge. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to pursue this exploration with you today.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what I would say first is I had been musing on The Luminous Self as my first book.
Mhm.
And that was the book that I had created my book proposal for. My agent was getting ready to go out with it as my first book. And I had started to write the names of publishers that I was interested in publishing my book because they had published other books that I was interested in or loved. And I had written down on my paper as my first choice, Shambhala. And when I wrote that down, maybe 3 or 4 days later, I got a call. Actually, it was an email from one of the editors at Shambhala. And she was asking if I was interested in writing a book on Yoga Nidra. And, the ego wants what the ego wants. So it's like, well, I'm writing this other book. Don't you want to look at that book? And there's this person who's writing a book on Yoga Nidra, and there's these 3 books on Yoga Nidra that are really amazing. And that's not something I think I want to do. And so the editor asked me to just think about it. And I said I would think about it. And then I said, well, I like to look for synchronicities. So if there's any synchronicities that come up around this, then I'll have to listen. And I was teaching in Whistler that same week. And about 6 or 7 people after my workshop came up and said, where can I buy your book? You have a book on Yoga Nidra, right? And I was like, okay, nobody has ever asked me before about a book on Yoga Nidra, so I have to listen. And so I had to really go into a deep contemplation around what did I have to offer. So it was less about what's missing from the conversation in the beginning. It was more about what do I have to offer? And what I felt that I had to offer was a window into how to cultivate a relationship with the practice of Yoga Nidra, with the state of Yoga Nidra, with this story of the goddess. And that then became expanded into then looking around to see what else was I practicing? What else was I understanding about rest, especially as a Black woman? And how was that informing my relationship with Yoga Nidra?
Mhm.
That was really how the book came about.
Beautiful. So, how do you define Yoga Nidra for someone who's never experienced it, and what makes it different from meditation or sleep?
Yeah. So, Yoga Nidra, the way that I describe it, is a practice of deep relaxation that leads to a place of non doing and resting in presence. And so, all of those things could sound wonderful depending on what your other practices might be. But at the end of the day, you don't know until you know. that's that's really it. And so I think what happens a lot of times when people practice Yoga Nidra for the first time is that they tap into this deep rest. But before they get to this level of deep rest, they also get to see and feel the deep exhaustion. And the deep exhaustion a lot of times comes as a big surprise because there are people who are healers and teachers, and they're like, oh, I'm rested and da, 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 da. And then you realize, oh, there's this deep level of exhaustion. And underneath that exhaustion, there might be a deep level of grief. There might be a deep level of something else that has been sitting and is ready to be dissolved. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So for Yoga Nidra, I think most people that are coming, depending on where they're coming from, sometimes they think it's about sleep. And while it is true that you can allow, in the practice of Yoga Nidra, you can allow your mind to fall asleep. You can allow your body to fall asleep. But there's a part of you that remains awake and aware. Mm-hmm. And we get to touch that part of ourselves that is always at rest, but always awake. And so how somebody might be listening and thinking, well, how is that possible? There might have been a time when you were in a place or you were in a yoga class and you were in Shavasana and you heard someone snoring, like the person next to you. And you're thinking, oh, I can't believe this person's snoring. And then at some point you're like, oh, wait, that's me. I'm the one who's snoring.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Has that happened to you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And when that happens, it's like, okay, so how is it possible that I can be aware that someone is snoring and yet I am the one snoring? Mm-hmm. There's a part of us that's awake. And so being in that place is what I can say is leading us into the space of Yoga Nidra.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So you often speak about rest as a form of resistance. Can you elaborate on what that means, and especially for marginalized communities?
Yeah. And first thing I want to say is acknowledging Trisha Hersey, acknowledging Audre Lorde, acknowledging Octavia Rahim, acknowledging all of these beautiful teachers who have expressed something in a similar way. And I think what I have said around Yoga Nidra is that it is counterculture. It is against the norm. And if it's a form of resistance, in my mind, it's a form of resistance because we are going against what the overculture wants us to do and what the overculture wants us to be, which is exhausted, burnt out, not able to access our power, not able to have clarity of mind, not able to have a voice. And so that is something that, to me, what I have said is that rest is a birthright, and rest is something that we need to reclaim as our birthright, because too many of us come from people who were enslaved, and it was really a matter of life or death. If you were caught resting, you might have been beaten, you might have been killed. And then in modern day culture, that turns itself into this idea of laziness, right? Or that I have to, I'll sleep when I'm dead.
Exactly. Right? Exactly.
And those are things that we need to be able to lay down. It's not to say that because you are someone who loves rest or is devoted to rest, that you give up everything else. What you realize when you are truly rested is that rest actually makes you more productive. And when I say more productive, it's not about doing more things. It's about the amount of clarity, awakened clarity that comes through you, that you don't have to go through A to Z to get to the solution of a problem. The clarity comes, and all of a sudden, you're having the download because you've slowed down enough. You're listening. You're able to know what the answers are in a way that doesn't come to you when you are exhausted.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I've often spoken about and actually wrote a piece about meditation and self-care as an act of resistance as well. because you're right, the overculture would have us always be in a state of distraction. I was thinking about how when I was in college, high school, whatever, the focus was on Peyton Place or Dallas. It was using the television as a way to keep people sort of entrained and away from self-awareness. And I was visiting China and I noticed that going into places where there was no floor, the ground is the floor. There were televisions there with the opportunity for people to only see these government channels, but really recognize that this is one of the ways the culture keeps people in bondage, essentially. And the replacement today is the social media, you know, so it's the new distraction. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, because I think the key word for me that you just used was this idea of entrainment, right?
yes.
You can entrain yourself to the flow of the algorithm on social media, which is what's happening when you are scrolling endlessly. And before you know it, an hour has gone by and you only meant to look at one thing online. Right. Or you can entrain yourself to the divine. You can entrain yourself to the divine within you, right? And realize that all these things that we are constantly looking for externally are actually already within. And that is the value of a spiritual practice. And it's difficult because there's a lot of trickster energy in this overculture and where it wants our attention to be directed to. And so anyone who's listening really should just be asking, do I feel like what I do during the day is life enhancing? Or do I feel like it's depleting? And if you sense that something is depleting, an action that you are doing consistently day in and day out, you have created a ritual for yourself of depletion. And we have to be the ones to be able to break that cycle for ourselves.
Exactly, exactly. In Luminous Self, you explore the connection between Yoga Nidra and self-realization. How does this practice help us to access our authentic selves?
Yeah. Earlier in our conversation, I mentioned that Yoga Nidra is the practice of subtraction.
Yes.
And so if you're asking, in a way, take from me all that is not free, then you're left with what is free, which is the true self.
Beautiful. I like that very much because often we think about gaining something, that in order to become awakened, enlightened, that we have to gain something. And this idea, no, we're not trying to add more. We're trying to simply take away everything that distracts from that.
Yeah. And that also is a frequency of the overculture, is that in general, we are in a transactional relationship with everything. And including most of the time, if we're not careful, our spiritual practice is that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to meditate because I want to feel better. I'm going to go out into nature because I want to see the beauty and take part of the beauty back with me, right? We haven't learned to release this idea of not only transaction, but extraction. And anytime you're in a transactional or extractive relationship, it's depleting. So we have to learn to be able to go in with an open hand and have gratitude also.
Same for karma yoga. Like I'm doing this to help humanity so I can earn good karma. you know, I mean, like that's a transactional notion as well. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a good practice, I think, to notice when you are in transaction. It's like, am I doing this because I want to get something out of it? Am I in a relationship with this person because I think they can help me? That's also really helpful to bring yourself into this place of unconditional love.
Love that. Love it. The Love Letters to Our Bodies podcast is sponsored by Moyo Institute Incorporated, a nonprofit organization offering heart-centered educational experiences, and the Lloyd Symington Foundation, which supports visionary grassroots cancer programs. So what role does the body play in Yoga Nidra, and how does this practice help us develop a more loving relationship with our physical form?
That's a really beautiful question. And what I would hearken back to is the origins of Yoga Nidra. The origins of Yoga Nidra were to consecrate the body as a divine temple. Yoga Nidra is based on a nyasa practice. And nyasa has many different definitions, but some of the definitions are to place, to drop, to anoint, to paint, to draw. And so in the olden days, that was taking the form of placing letters of the Sanskrit alphabet into the body, placing the bija mantras of the deities into the body, and consecrating the body. So this idea of the progressive, systematic, deep relaxation, where we talk about, feel the right hand, the right wrist, those are all based on these nyasas, which correlate the places where the mantras were being placed, correlate to the marma points a lot of times. Mm-hmm. So I like to take things back to their core essence to understand, why am I doing a thing, right? And so for me, why am I doing Yoga Nidra? Why am I practicing Yoga Nidra? Why am I cultivating this relationship with Yoga Nidra? Is so that I can remember myself as being divine. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if I remember myself as being divine, I can remember someone else as being divine. I can know that someone else is divine. I can know that everything around me is divine, and that I am connected inextricably to every single human being on this planet, whether I like them or not.
Exactly. And then in the chakras, for instance, that each chakra represents a portal, so to speak, and each chakra has a deity that's in charge of it. So it's a divine energy for every single one of them. So I think you probably become more aware of all of that in such a practice.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, it's a subtraction, it's an anointing, it's a consecrating, and ultimately it's a smriti practice. And when we think about this word smriti, I believe it has at its root the word smarana, which means remembrance. Mm-hmm. And it refers not to the remembrance of like our retention of memory, like, oh, I'm memorizing information. It's the remembrance of the self. It's the remembrance of the true self. So these practices, yes, they are helpful for relaxation. They're helpful for anxiety, for depression. There's many, many studies right now, most of which were done by IRES and some other places, that show the efficacy of these rest practices for our mental health and for our physical health. But as a spiritual practice, these practices help us to remember who we truly are.
Yes, indeed. So you've worked extensively with women and the BIPOC communities. And how do you adapt Yoga Nidra to be culturally responsive and inclusive?
Yeah, I would say that for me, we have to remember that Yoga Nidra comes from a lineage of Southeast Asian practices. And some also say that it comes from African practices as well. And so what I would say for me is not trying to transpose some of the cultural images into a space, because we don't know how people will react to certain words, certain images. At least when I was first practicing Yoga Nidra, the thing was, oh, relax, let go. Those were the instructions. And again, those instructions can feel very violent to some people. So bringing in language that is nurturing, that is inclusive, that is trauma informed, I think is the way to go. And so I think that for me, Yoga Nidra happens in the spaciousness. And if you can create a container where people feel like they can be held in the spaciousness, that's where the magic happens. That's where the healing happens. So while practicing and sharing this practice of Yoga Nidra that we talked about is the practice of subtraction, I am also subtracting or trying to subtract my personality out of being the person who's guiding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can you give a specific example of what that looks like? Like an example when you refer to the words relax and letting go as being perceived as violent for some. Like, can you give an example of the more spacious expression?
Yeah, you just said it. Allow spaciousness, soften, notice.
Mm-hmm.
This allows you to have the experience as opposed to me transposing some sort of experience onto you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because for some people, having somebody say, let go or just relax can be very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're practicing with many people in a room, we don't know what the experience is of everybody there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. What's the relationship between rest and healing generational trauma? Is there one?
Absolutely. I mean, we carry our ancestors in our DNA. So anything that we do is affecting that line of lineage. And so I think for me, what I like to do is I bring in circles of protection when I'm practicing. And one of those circles of protection that I bring in is a circle of well ancestors to help protect the space. And then also asking that those well ancestors bring that healing of my own rest into my other lineages. So when we rest, we're resting for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We're resting for everybody, whether we know it or not, because our ancestors are there in our DNA. We're resting for everybody that came before us. And we're also resting for everybody who's going to come after us.
What you just said is so profound. It's so profound. When you think about it in terms of our ancestors who were forbidden rest, who didn't have an opportunity to rest, that by our cultivating this within our being, that we're gifting it to them as well. I never thought about that. I mean, I really know the importance of the ancestors in the DNA. I know that we're the product of their hopes and dreams and fears and all of that. And I know that we pray for them. But I didn't think about the fact that simply by resting and cultivating that in our being, that we're gifting them with that as well. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a healing practice for everyone in our family who's alive and for those who have passed. It's a healing practice for the environment that we live in. You know, you're raising the vibration of your own space when you decide to dedicate a space for rest.
Beautiful. Beautiful. For someone who's new to Yoga Nidra, what would you recommend as a starting point?
I think, the best starting point is that there are so many different Yoga Nidra practices that are available on YouTube or on Insight Timer. So finding a Yoga Nidra by someone whose voice you like, that you feel nourished by, is probably the most important thing. So asking your friends, if you have friends who are practicing, do they have their favorite Yoga Nidra they can send you? And you might want to just begin to practice once a day. You can practice once a day with a short Yoga Nidra. And I would say for anybody to just practice 7 consecutive days in a row and just note, how do you feel versus how you felt on day 1? The practice is the teacher. The practice is the teacher, and the practice will show you what needs to be shown. And you will definitely have an effect after 7 consecutive days of practicing.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, how do you address resistance to rest, especially for people who feel guilty about slowing down?
Yeah. So, the first thing that I work with is a set of inquiry questions. And this is actually in my book, Radiant Rest. There's 2 practices. One is the inquiries around questions like, who modeled rest for you? 90%, and this is not a scientific study, but just in general, 90% of people who answer this question say no one, right? What was the message that you got about the value of rest and your ability to have it in your own life? And so there we get answers around unworthiness. Oh no, my parents had to work 3 jobs. There was no rest. I'll rest when I'm dead, as we talked about before. Mm-hmm. So you have to look at the internalized messages that you got, your own belief about your own worthiness to have rest. Other questions around if you could change the relationship to rest for your lineage, how would you begin? Because we know that it's important. And, there's another question that could come through, which is, who would you lose? And how would your life change if you were your most powerful? Because we all have people in our lives that may not want us to be thriving, that we ourselves may be afraid to be our most powerful, to be our most brilliant. And those are things that we also have to face. So I begin with self-inquiry to get to the bottom of those things, because sometimes we're not aware of it. And then at the same time, we do a practice called the body map, where you lead yourself through a body scan and you draw a map of what you notice. So you can become more aware of your own body, what you're feeling, what emotions, what colors, what images, what memories might come through. And you begin to actually have a relationship with your own body, not only your physical body, but your subtle body.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Speaking of the subtle body, can you walk us through what happens in the nervous system during a Yoga Nidra practice?
Yeah, I would love to say that it's a one and done situation, but it's not. Mm-hmm. It's the very same thing where directing someone to, let's say, inhale for 4 and exhale for 8, which some people might say would help to calm the nervous system and bring you into rest and digest, may not be for everyone. So it's individual. And I think that this is why it's important for us to do practices like the body map, because it actually lets us understand what is our own individual nervous system. Not that the nervous system is a monolith, right? But what relaxes us, what brings us into rest and digest, and then we can move more towards that and away from what brings us into a fight or flight. Also knowing that fight or flight is valuable. It's not something that we want to turn off.
Yes, valuable in moderation, or valuable when needed.
Exactly. Yeah.
It serves a really important function of self-preservation. So, how do you navigate the wellness industry as a Black woman, and what changes would you like to see in how practices are taught and shared?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not in the wellness industry.
Okay.
I am a spiritual teacher, right? And I am going to resist any idea of the spiritual practices being subsumed by a wellness industry. And so what I would say is, when people think about wellness, what does that really mean? And are they getting the full breadth of practices, or are they getting things that have been designed and cultivated and curated for the distracted mind? because the distracted mind, and we all have a distracted mind. So I'm not sitting here like, oh, you guys have a distracted mind. I also have a distracted mind, right? But the distracted mind is not going to seek out the sadhana for 40 days straight. The distracted mind wants it quick. That's what we've been trained for. I want it quick. I want it now. I want it easy. These kinds of transformations don't happen easy. And so what you wind up having, from my point of view, is a series of things that have been borrowed, stolen, taken from indigenous cultures and spiritual lineages and watered down so that they're bite-sized and easy to do. So you have to choose. Do I want bite-sized? And, surface level that might also be good for me still? Or do I want something that goes deeper?
One of the ways that we talk about it in spiritual community is, do you want the light bulb or do you want the light?
I love that.
So many people settle for the light bulb.
Well, it's a great analogy because, if we think about what happened with the invention of the light bulb, that was the beginning of us being disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from nature, disconnected from the cycles and the seasons. And it is a direct correlation to where we are right now as a civilization. But I digress. We can talk about that for hours.
No worries, no worries. So, what's your perspective on making ancient practices accessible while honoring their origins? You touched on that a bit when you talked about how in our culture, the attempt is to make things bite-sized as opposed to really offering the expanse of what's possible.
Yeah. So what I would say is it's possible to offer practices that are small, but they need to be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we think about this idea of the householder and the householder who has and is juggling many different responsibilities. You might have kids, you might have a job, you might have a family, you might be a caretaker, and you don't have an hour a day to do some sort of practice. But maybe you can start to reduce the distractions that you have. And maybe you can slip in something for 10 minutes or 5 minutes that you do every day. And when you do that every day, you can begin to pull the thread from the last practice into the following day. And that becomes a sadhana. And then at some point, you start to see little pockets of time and spaciousness where you can add another practice, or you can add a little bit of silence, or just sitting and having a cup of tea or having a 5-minute rest practice. You start to notice when you're being distracted and when the mind is busy, and you maybe start to pull back from those distractions and you replace them with things that are more life affirming. But the key is the consistency, and thinking about consistency not as this discipline, because discipline can have negative connotations to it, but thinking about it in the way of devotion and weaving.
I like the idea of weaving. And I think your earlier point about in Yoga Nidra, starting with like daily for 7 days to really begin to get your system acclimated and accustomed to that. And I think one of the things that I love about a meditation is that it's like your nervous system starts to expect it, right? When you sit in a particular place, when you maybe put your hands in a particular mudra, it's like you're signaling to the brain or to the mind that, okay, now we're going deeper. And you're right, consistency is really, really important.
Yeah. And you're also signaling to the divine. I'm ready to receive. I'm an open vessel to receive wisdom, to receive healing. There's so many ways. And not only that, but you're energetically charging the space that you're sitting in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, how does your work challenge dominant narratives about productivity and worth?
Well, I mean, I think just by the act of laying down, just by the act of laying down and inviting not only myself to lay down, I retired from a career as a film producer, and my literal title was creative producer. So it was like producing is actually in my job title.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, so the act of laying down, and thank goodness I've found the practice of Yoga Nidra while I was in that career, but it allows you to say, no, I'm going to take care of me first. And when I take care of me first, my cup is then full. And then I can offer from that place of fullness and wholeness. Yoga Nidra reminds you that you are whole. The overculture tells you nothing except you are not whole, you are not enough, you need more of this or more of that to be whole.
Yeah, beautiful. I recall from Luminous Self, I think it was, that I was reading about your being in South Africa and having this experience of expansive awareness. Can you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah. So that was the beginning of my spiritual journey
Mm-hmm.
because I was just minding my business, sitting on my balcony, watching Table Mountain and what they call the tablecloth of clouds that veil and unveil over Table Mountain. And I had a moment of what felt like time stood still. It felt like time and space opened up, and there was this stillness. And in that stillness, there was a knowing. It was almost like every question that I had, the answer just flowed in. And then it was over. And I had no idea what happened to me. Zero idea. I asked my roommates, I told them what happened. They looked at me like I had 12 heads. And then I finally met somebody in South Africa who said, "Oh, I know exactly what happened to you." And he took me to a spiritual bookstore and he handed me like 8 different books. And he said, "Read these." And at that time, I was an extremely avid reader. So got through them in probably less than a month, and things started to unfold. I started to shift a perspective of what I understood to be true, including who and what I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the one thing that I was very clear on was that this sense of expansiveness and knowing was not something that came from outside of me. It was something that was being revealed.
Mm-hmm.
And although I didn't have those exact words at the time, when I then, how many years later was that? 6 years later, had my first Yoga Nidra experience, it was the same frequency as what happened on the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things were connected. It was almost as though that moment, and it did, led me to being able to be in that space to receive a practice that leads to this kind of expansive awareness.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love Table Mountain and visited South Africa maybe 2001, something like that. And it was really interesting. Part of the experience for me was to be there in a way that left footprints that were empty, so to speak. Like I wanted to experience the country without adding any negativity.
Mm.
And so I experienced it as a place of contrast, like rich, poor, black, white, open, closed. And being there that way enabled me to be fully present for the experience and to really allow myself to flow with whatever was presenting in a given day, whether it was driving to Mahalisburg to see a Sangoma or guests coming over early in the day and staying until midnight which is something that doesn't really happen in the States,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was really a really beautiful, beautiful experience there as well.
Yeah. That was a life-changing time living in South Africa for a few years. Yeah.
Beautiful. So what has your own Yoga Nidra, I'll say it right one day, Nidra practice taught you about your relationship with your body?
What I would say is it's taught me that it's different every day
Mm-hmm.
and that there have been surprises of experiences that have been held for a long time in the body that I wasn't aware of, that I became aware of when I first started practicing and even much later. And that things that happen in the body, at least this is my belief, they happen first in the subtle realm.
Mm-hmm.
And so just being able to be aware and to tend daily to the body is really important. That's something that, this is beyond self-care. This is really a kind of reverence for your own self and your own body that I think needs to happen and be normalized.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people, think it's selfish.
I agree with you about the subtle body being the first place that usually by the time, quote unquote, disease or illness shows up in the body, it's in its most physical state. It's been in development and subtle levels and subtle layers for a long time, which is also why sometimes it's a challenge to have it altered at the physical.
Yeah.
So paying attention early is really, really important.
Yeah. And also listening to your intuition. Right.
So how do you hope people feel after experiencing your teachings or reading your books?
Well, my main goal, I would say, and hope is that people are inspired, inspired to love themselves, inspired to know that they're worthy and to act as such, whatever that means. They may read my book and never rest, but they may know something deeper within themselves that changes the way they see themselves and the world.
And what would you want everyone to know about the power of conscious rest?
Well, I would say that is what we all deserve.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I know you're working on another book right now,
I am, yes.
soon to be published.
Yeah, in August of 2026, it's going to come out.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking this time to share with us. It's really a very beautiful spiritual communion that's happening. And we will put information about how people can be in touch and how people can reach you in the show notes. So thank you so much, Tracee. It's really quite a heart expanding experience being in communion with you today.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Thank you for all the beautiful questions and the exquisite space that you hold. I feel really honored to have been here.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to Love Letters to Our Bodies, conversations on health, healing, and happiness. To find out more about the Love Letters to Our Bodies project, visit our website at moyo-institute.org. That's MOYO Institute.org. Follow us on social media and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. If there are topics you'd like for us to discuss, let us know. Remember, your body is beautiful, girlfriend. Love it.